you. And I truly, I love doing this. It's a, who doesn't like having a glass of wine at 5 o'clock? And it's wonderful. So, thank you. And I appreciate, you all being here and you're supporting this program. So, this month we're headed to Bordeaux, and Bordeaux is a region that is probably, well, no, is the most significant wine region in the world. Um, in part because it has been that way for so long. It's maybe wine's ancestral homeland or modern wine's ancestral homeland, but this is really where much of the global business of wine is centered. In fact, every year there's a massive trade show called Vin Expo, and people from all over the world come, and it's a massive trade show where proprietors are attempting to show their new vintages and sign up new international distributors. But Bordeaux has always been significant. It is both a, so just to be clear, Bordeaux is both a wine region. As a wine region, it's about, I want to say 375 miles southwest of Paris. It sits roughly 25 to 30 miles from the ocean, which is significant. It is an area that is accessible by one main river, and that breaks off into two smaller rivers. But that really is where the story of Bordeaux begins, because it's a very old region. The Romans started planting grapes 20 some odd centuries ago for the production of wine in this region. But at the time, it was, the two rivers draw in a lot of water, obviously. And so while Bordeaux did have elevated areas on the river banks away from the river, for the most part, it was a swamp. And around the late 1500s, 1575, 1580, the Dutch, which at the time the Dutch have always been big wine drinkers. They're not able to produce their own wine, and so
I'll see if I can.
The Dutch have to source from other places, and so the Dutch were buying wine in the early 1600s, but were not. I mean, like I said, it was a swamp, and most of the property was swampland. So the Dutch, being experts at drainage and water management, helped drain Bordeaux. So for about the next 50 to 75 years, a fairly significant effort was made to drain Bordeaux and essentially to create more vineyard land, which worked out very well because grapes have favored places to grow, and Bordeaux is one of them. It is because of that water and because of the drainage, the soils in Bordeaux are fairly well drained, which is really important. Grapes like well draining soil, and they are defined by where in the river they are. So there are two large regions in Bordeaux, the Medoc, and we will have this wine is appellated from Medoc, and Grave, and those are the two kind of large sub-regions. And then within them, there are even more sub-regions. Many of the famous so-called first growth Bordeaux producers, Chateau Latour, Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite, are in this in the Medoc and the Graves region. On the other side, so that is referred to as the left bank of the river. The right bank is home to one large region called Libournais, and has several very, very high-end producers located on what's called the left bank. And the reason the right bank and left bank are important is that the right bank is, the left bank is mostly clay and stones, and the right bank is mostly left bank is mostly stones and gravel and limestone, things that are rocky, basically where the river had dumped it. And the right bank is mostly clay. So the left bank likes Cabernet. Cabernet likes with warm soil. And so Cabernet grows very well on the left bank. The right bank is clay and cooler soil. And so Merlot grows better there. So that's, Cabernet and Merlot are the two drivers of Bordeaux wine. More Merlot than Cab, but those are the two main the headliners of the show. There are then for reds, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, Carmenere. There are several other Sauvignon Blanc for the whites, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Muscadel. There are a couple others but for the most part, the wines are defined by grapes growing in certain places and then how those grapes grow in those certain places. So they don't grow. They actually, sadly, due to climate change in 2021, they added 6 new grapes. So for literally a century, more than a century, almost 2 centuries, they have produced, say, a dozen plus, grown about a dozen plus varietals. In 21, they added 6 new ones that were selected for their ability to withstand heat and drought. So within the next 10 years, we may start seeing Trigo Nacional, which is a grape that is traditionally grown in Portugal in the Douro River, and Albarino, which is traditionally grown in Spain. So not the traditional grapes of Bordeaux. So we will see this profile change in the coming decades for sure. It remained stable for most of Bordeaux's history. So the Dutch drained it in 1675, 1680 through the early 1700s. Production increased, popularity increased. And then in 1855, the French, who were very, not only good wine growers, but very savvy business people, set about to rank the best growers and best properties in Bordeaux. And this was done by the Chamber of Commerce. So it was less of a, I guess it was not impartial. Those who sold the most wine for the highest prices were elevated to higher status, and that status remains to this day. There have been very few changes to what's called the classification of 1855, but the same. There were 4 original first growth properties. One was added later to make 5, but there are still only 5 properties in the top tier of this ranking that was established in 1855. So not a lot has changed in Bordeaux over the years. Style-wise, they are making what we would describe as more modern wines. They're a little more fruit forward. They don't take decades to mature. Bordeaux wine typically is very age worthy. In fact, the property that I am, there we go. That is a property called Cas d'Estrennel. I have a 2000 Cas d'Estrennel. It's from Saint-Estèphe. And being a 22-year-old wine, it's still got many moons to go. So they make very long-lived wine. I think that. Oh, and then lastly, so right bank, left bank, and then the river actually breaks further south. It breaks apart a little bit, and there is a plain that a dry plain that exists between, called the Entre Mer, means between two tides, and a lot of white wine is grown there. So without further ado, I think we'll begin with that white wine. So Le Dunes de Cap Ferret is a Bordeaux Blanc. Sorry, kind of comes in and out. But a Bordeaux Blanc. It could include a grape Muscadel. In this case, it doesn't. It is 60% Sauvignon Blanc, 40% Semillon. So the style of Bordeaux Blancs, Bordeaux Whites, is you take a grape like Sauvignon Blanc, which has got good minerality and acidity, and you add a little bit of softer texture, a little more fruit to it with the Semillon. Kind of rounds it out. So this is a very, very classic style. We can all take a little sniffy sniff and sip.
Feel free to put any comments or notes in the chat that you are tasting or smelling.
So this, I mean, from the Sauvignon Blanc, you get that mouth-watering kind of gooseberry. In fact, my mouth is still watering. Gooseberry, maybe a little passion fruit, sort of that grassy herbaceousness, minerality, wet stones. And then from that Semillon, the addition of Semillon, a little more maybe tropical fruit, some pineapple, possibly some melon, and it just blunts the sharpness. I mean, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, for example, very, very tart, very crisp, very racy. Bordeaux Blanc, Bordeaux white blends generally are not that edgy. They choose to kind of tone it down a little bit with that Semillon. But yeah, really, I like. We don't see the unfortunate thing is Bordeaux is as such a highly regarded region. Not always. There's certainly some great values from Bordeaux. Absolutely. They're not as easy to find as some. A lot of the very high-end producers. I mean, some of the producers in this part of France and in this part of the wine world produce some of the most expensive, sought-after wines on the planet. I mean, where $1,000 is kind of a starting point for their reds.
Wow.
And if they're old, if they are large format, that can go to tens of thousands for wine. In fact, the high water mark, I read there is a producer. Oh, the name just flew out of my mind. But there is a producer who makes a tiny a Libre. I'll think of it. Anyway, there's a producer in Bordeaux who makes a tiny amount of a wine from red wine from vines that have survived. There was a huge outbreak of a vineyard pest in the late 1850s that wiped out a lot of Bordeaux, and this producer has some of the original ungrafted, unaffected vines that still remain. And one single bottle of his wine goes for $30,000.
Wow.
I've never had it. I don't expect to ever have it. I can't imagine what a $30,000 wine would taste like. But this particular producer has no trouble selling out their entire production every single year. Now, it's not very large, but I guess at $30,000 a bottle, it probably doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
So
it's not library wine.
it's not, no, and that's the problem. So much of Bordeaux. I mean, when I was first starting to sell wine in the mid '90s, a bottle of the most expensive, one of those first growth Bordeaux producers, those top 5 producers, a bottle from a great vintage could be had for $125, which is a lot of money.
Mhm.
However, relative to the price today, that could easily be $1,250, or $2,050. I mean, it is increased exponentially. It is,
Wow.
in fact, Bordeaux wine today is actually considered an asset class. Um, but it is, so there's the unfortunate thing is there's not a lot of um, really interesting good value wine from Bordeaux. There's a lot of wine, and some of it is there's a lot of average wine produced in Bordeaux, but between average and trophy, that's kind of where we want to look, and I think these two wines represent that. The Entre-deux-Mers, as I said, it's mostly a region where they grow kind of everyday drinking red and whites. So they do have the access to, I mean, the ability to produce some nice value wine, and I think this is white Bordeaux. It's probably one of the greatest white wines I ever had. Unfortunately, I didn't have to pay for it. Was a white Bordeaux from one of the top tier producers, and I mean, it was stunning. It was absolutely brilliant. I had it with some fish and food. By the way, I should also point out the Bordelais love to eat. Not only is Bordeaux a wine center, it's a gastronomic center for France. So if you're in Bordeaux, it's pretty hard to have a bad meal. But food, I mean, wine in Bordeaux is the condiment to the meal, and so everything has a pairing. Being on a river and being about 30 some miles from the ocean, they do eat a lot of fish, but they have forests nearby, so they're all sorts of woodland creatures that show up on menus quite well. But yeah, Bordeaux is a wonderful place. So thoughts on? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a comment from Jack Altman. Speaking of pairings, that
Mhm.
I really like this wine. I find that the bite I'm eating is really good at cutting some of the minerality and acidity.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
pairing with provolone, tomato, chive, basil, and lemon, olive oil, and pine
Mhm.
nuts. Yum.
Yeah.
The cheese
Yeah.
and chives make a really good wine superb with food.
Absolutely. No, and that, I mean, what you're kind of addressing there is the fattiness of food. When oftentimes, I mean, there are a lot of ways of pairing wine with food. Sometimes you want to show off the wine, sometimes you want to show off the food, sometimes you want to collaborate between the two. But where a wine like this really shines is where you have something. I mean, a cheese, obviously, milk fat. You've got that milk fat. You really want something to kind of wash that off the palate, so that you taste more of the cheese, you taste more of the wine. The milk fat can kind of act as a barrier to your taste buds, and so a wine like this causes all of that milk fat to kind of dissolve. It actually melds nicely with the wine, but it refreshes the palate. So I love these wines. As I said, mineral they love a lot of freshwater and saltwater fish, and so the minerality really, in that case, does some nice things. It brings out kind of the you know the the brininess if it's a saltwater fish, the freshness if it's a freshwater fish, of that in that preparation. And so their wines always have a good food companion. But I yes, absolutely eat and drink well with Bordeaux wines.
Is there a like an ideal temperature to serve this wine at?
I so I it depends. It depends on the wine. This one, I think I pulled it out of the fridge maybe 10 minutes before. I like it where it's now. Um, it probably can do to be a little warmer. You don't want to over chill your whites. I mean, there's certain whites that do very well with a good hard chill on them. Others really kind of, I mean, I'll even taste wine where once it's finally warmed up to room temperature, say like 67, 68 degrees, it shows differently than it did when it was colder. I mean, in a good way. So I would say, yeah, maybe 10 minutes out of the fridge on this guy. It seems I'm noticing more things in the glass, and it just has a really the temperature, I think, is good. It doesn't need to be colder, certainly.
Okay. And then this is just a question I had. You use the term large format wine. What is that?
Oh, yeah. So basically, large format wine is bottled in many sizes, and in fact, we should even see more. We've already started seeing them. Europeans really like using 700 milliliter bottles,
Okay.
and we use 750. I mean, we use milliliters, which is I guess good. But there are formats. So and it's been years since I've remembered them all, but let's see. So we have a Magnum, which would be two bottles. A Jeroboam, which would be, I think that's 3 bottles, 4 bottles. Oh, I'm not even going to try to keep up. But a Jeroboam is the next size. Methuselah is the size after that. Rehoboam. Let's see. Rehoboam, Methuselah, Salmanazar, Balthazar, Nebuchadnezzar. So a Nebuchadnezzar, I want to say, is 16 liters or 12
wow.
liters.
Who knew?
So the reason that and those, so anything larger than a 750 is considered large format.
Okay.
Magnums are probably the most common, but they the reason for that is wine actually ages better in larger formats, and if you have the wherewithal to purchase, say, a 3 liter or a 6 liter of a great producer, I mean, it might set you back 10, 20, $30,000, but that wine is going to age beautifully, and sadly more likely go to auction. A lot of the large format wines, although China does have a penchant for drinking off really, really crazy expensive wine, old and new. But most of the large format wines are sold for collecting, sold as to be traded at auction. But yeah, anything larger than a Magnum would be considered a large format.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for enduring that conversation between Scott Morgan and myself. Scott claims you were making all those names up. So.
Oh, I was. No, it's actually, so to be honest, and again, it's been a fat minute since I had to learn this, but the mnemonic device is just remove my shoes before Nookie. That would be Jeroboam. Yes,
an even better factoid.
Yeah. Well, that's how we had when we were studying back in the day. That was the.
I got to write that one down so
that
I
was
remember
the device.
mnemonic device.
Yes.
That's great.
But so let's move on to the red. So from Entre-deux-Mers, we're going to go to the left bank, to the Medoc region, and again, this side of the river, the soil is loose gravel, and it's kind of cool. Trying to see Cause d'Estrennel behind me. If in a lot of the pictures, you can often tell which side of the river of the estate resides on by looking at the vineyard, because there's just, the soil at this particular winery. There is dirt, but there is a ton of gravel and maybe golf ball to baseball sized river rock throughout the vineyard. So you can usually tell which side of the river just by looking at the picture which side of the estate is located. So the Medoc is that soil, very well drained. This would be considered a warm soil. Cabernet likes the warmer soil, so it generally is the dominant varietal in this particular the dominant varietal on the left bank. In this case, the blend is 50 Merlot, 45 Cab, 5 Petit Verdot. Petit Verdot is one of the famous Bordeaux varietals, used for structure and color. It adds complexity and ageability. So even just that little 5% will dramatically change the profile of the wine. Vintage 2016, I guess that's the other thing. So vintage is Bordeaux, in say a 5-year period, there is a good chance that 1 to 2 of those vintages will be excellent. The challenge that Bordeaux has, and unfortunately with climate change is increasing, it's 25 to 35, depending on where you are, miles from the ocean, and there's not really any barrier to storms. There's some forests, some pine forests that reside in between, and that kind of can slow down the winds, but they will get inclement weather. And so there are vintages that have great, not as bad as Burgundy. Burgundy is more affected by this, but Bordeaux, will have an average vintage or a great vintage, maybe turned into an average vintage due to rain or temperatures that are not ideal for fruit set in the spring, rain at harvest, cold temperatures at fruit set, not enough humidity at fruit set, things like that change the crop. But roughly every 5 years, there's at least 1 to 2 vintages that are truly outstanding. And in that Cas d'Estournel 2000 vintage, there we go. That 2000 vintage, 2000 was, aside from being a millennial year, it was also an extremely high quality year, and those wines will be consumed, for 50. That wine could be 75 years from now. Somebody's opening that wine. So Chateau Panagon 2016 Cru Bourgeois, nice blend. Let's give it a sip.
I'll point out that Scott, who has my name, that is the vineyard of the wine that you're drinking. So that's what it looks like.
I'm sorry?
The background that Scott had, that is a picture of that particular vineyard.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. That's so funny. I was like, it looks familiar.
Yeah.
I can't recognize it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. No, it is. And you can see, these are two different sub-regions of Bordeaux, but for the most part, they're flat. They are, you can tell that it's not a complete surprise that this might have been a swamp at some point. But gotta thank the Dutch for their flood management skills back in the day for making this possible. So it had been a while since I've had this. This is a 2016. I think it's been in the market maybe for a year and a half or so. As you can see, it holds on beautifully. This is showing it's in an evolution phase. So it is evolving, but still tons of life. This could be something in a nice, cool, dark spot. Another couple, 3-4 years. I'd love to see it again and see how it's doing. But this is really a classic Bordeaux. It leads off with dark fruits, black currant, blackberry, and then you get some minerality, some kind of pencil lead notes, which you do find a lot of kind of minerality in the wines of Bordeaux. Again, they're all rooted in rocky soil or complex soils that yield that. But it just, I mean, the flavors, the nose, it's dark fruits. I get a little bit of leather, some spice notes. There's a lot of complexity to this,
Mhm.
and good acidity would stand up beautifully to a steak or duck or something with some fat to it. Probably being French, probably a rich sauce. But that the acidity in this wine would the richness would complement the sauce and the protein, where that acidity, which is not overly present but is definitely there, would help kind of usher out that richness, and prepare for that next bite of food. But I really I was actually quite impressed with this wine when I opened it earlier today. It's showing very well.
Well, Amy has a good question. It
Mhm.
says, a wine can be good still after 50 years, but will it keep getting better for that long? Or is there a limit even with great wines? Would your 2000 bottle be great now after 21 years or even tons better in 2032?
Um, so it depends on the wine. I probably this particular wine, I don't know, it probably won't show well, but you can see. Oh, wait a minute, I had it a minute ago. Come on, I don't know if you can see the fill line,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's about it's middle of the neck, which is a good thing. I mean, that's why, aging wine matters. How wine is aged matters amazing. I mean, it matters significantly. How a wine is stored. That I purchased that in a wine shop in New York, in probably 2002, and brought it home, and it's been in a cellar ever since. So the evaporation on that bottle has been fairly minimal. It still has a good fill line, so that's usually for aging wine. If you know the pedigree of the winery, and that the pedigree is very good. I mean, this is a very famous estate. Um, the fact that the wine still has a good fill line, that I know that it's been kept in a moist cellar, so the cork, while it will take some coaxing out, is probably still in good condition. That wine, I mean, it once you open it, it would need some air. It Wines, when they age, they often will get less fruit forward. So maybe the really kind of punch you in the face fruit steps back a little. It doesn't disappear, but the complexity of that wine does increase fairly substantially. Um, Aged wines, it, it depends on, really. I mean, I guess when people ask about aging wine, my question is, well, what do you like?
Mhm.
I mean, if if this wine, I love old Bordeaux, and wines. Bordeaux from better producers from the 80s and the 90s are still drinking quite well, and but they need food. I would probably take it to a nice restaurant to have that wine, and it would need to be decanted. It would need to be. I mean, there's sediment in the bottle, so there would be that. But yeah, when an old wine is served with a great meal, yeah, it is truly better than it was when it was younger. In my opinion. However, we'll nose the wine, and when it's young, and I mean when it's old rather, and in the glass, and it might smell like, cherries and leather and a dirty barn, and that's not. I mean, I guess the way I would describe it is some aged wine might be closer to like funky European cheese.
Mhm.
It's delicious to some who like funky European cheese or funky cheese in general. It's delicious. Can't really explain why something that smells, like the bottom of a dumpster, or
Mhm.
a sweat sock, is delicious, but it just is. And as the older wines open up, I mean, it doesn't smell just like funky cheese. It often blossoms. You know, you'll smell the wine, and there'll be this earthiness, this rusticity, and then you smell like the most intense violet or rose petal, or something like that lilac, or the most pure smell of cherry you've ever smelled. I mean, those things kind of evolve, and if you're into food and wine, an old bottle is truly a wonderful experience.
So Amy, is that you're feel free to unmute if you'd like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I will, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I understand about aging and how it makes them better, and I've got some in my cellar that I'm aging. But when you say like this Bordeaux wine could be good for 50 years, it will. But is it continuing to get better? Is it 30 years from now it'll be really good, but 50 years from now it'll be fantastic? Or does it reach a point where, I mean, even the really
diminished returns? Yeah. No, there are definitely wines that, I mean, I guess what I would say is, the short answer is it's sort of a case by case. So a great wine from a great vintage, from a great producer, cellared properly from the time it's released into the market until consumption, all of those things, you know, perfect. Yeah, the escalation of quality, or the development of the wine does actually continue. It will plateau. So I guess kind of the way wines evolve in their best form is some wines go up and then immediately crash. It's a weird thing there. I've had wines that literally will fall apart like a cheap suit in a matter of years. And you try it and it's like, oh my gosh. And then you go back and it's a train wreck. And I've dumped bottles of wine where I'm like, that's not even drinkable anymore. It just falls apart. But for the best wines, for the wines that, again, pedigree, I mean, where that wine is from and the vineyards it came from, and the winemakers who made it, those matter immensely. And so if all of those are good, wines will often they'll increase in quality for 10 to maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years. Then they'll plateau where they're not getting worse, but they're not getting better. And it depends on the wine, but that could last for decades, where it just kind of holds that spot. But then, yes, the end, if it's not consumed, and it's often hard to guess. I mean, every bottle is its own microcosm. It's got its own chemistry. It's got its own, I mean, maybe a bottle right after it got released, got stored in a room that got too hot. And you might not know what that bottle is going to taste like until decades later. So I mean, when people, I always tell, if you like aging wine, and you have, again, by a good producer from a good property, from a good vintage, I always say, definitely buy more than one, because you want to have one when it's young, know what that tastes like when it's young, know where it was once, and then jump in. And I mean, I don't think a case is required, but in an ideal world, you might have a case of that wine and you would taste it every so often to see where it's going. And then you would know kind of how it's developing. But yeah, generally speaking, good wines, they increase for several, they improve, they evolve for several decades, and then they hit kind of a plateau where they hold that and then eventually decline. But it's hard to give a general rule just because there's so many variables that can come into play.
Thanks. And I do want to let other people comment. I just want to say, so those of us who are Fraser fans, don't do like Fraser's dad and keep it next to the furnace.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Just in I asked, as a solid to the wine. Um, yeah, furnaces, garages, right above the refrigerator. They're definitely. I mean, wine, when wine wants to evolve, it would prefer to do it in really a cave, and the cave is probably around 58 degrees and 65 to 70% humidity. That's ideal for a wine. The humidity keeps the cork moist, and the temperature keeps the wine kind of in its sweet spot. But yeah, it's so sad. I do actually have many stories where people will come in. Often it's a family member has left them some wine, and they bring it in to see what it looks like. And it might be a bottle where, yeah, if this had been stored properly, you could get a couple $100, maybe thousands of dollars. But the cork is standing about quarter of an inch outside the bottle. It's a bird pooped on the label. I mean, it's probably not going to make it to auction. But usually, yeah, it's awful. I've had a lot of people bring in wine, and I'm like, it's kind of like that Pawn Stars show. It's like, well, I got to tell you, it's a memento for you, but nobody's going to drink it.
Yeah.
So sorry. But
Well,
yeah.
Well, Cliff has a question. It says, this wine has a long finish. Can you explain
Mhm.
that?
So that really is a mark of quality. And there are a lot of I mean, I guess I can't explain the physiology of the length, but it is, first of all, the choices that the winemaker made. Why is it 50% Merlot, 45 Cabernet? Why wasn't it 55% and I mean, the blend of the grapes. And why was it 5% Petit Verdot, or why was Cabernet Franc not added, which is an allowable grape but isn't in this blend? The winemaker made some choices early on, and the winemaker was looking for something that would hold on and have a lengthy finish. And so the ripeness of the fruit, how ripe it was when it was harvested, the chemistry that those grapes had, is what's gonna leave that. I mean, tannin. So in this case, it does have a dryness to it. There is the chemical compound tannin, which is found in nuts and woody things, grape skins, grape seeds, grape stems, oak barrels, all contribute tannin. But tannin, in its ideal state, has to be ripe. It has to be. You can't look at. I mean, a grape can look physiologically ripe. It can be this beautiful purple color, but the tannin in the stem and the seeds and the skin may not be ripe. So that's kind of the skills of the winemaker or the vineyard manager to say the tannins are perfectly ripe, and when they are perfectly ripe, they will behave, say, like chocolate. A really great piece of chocolate has perfectly ripe tannin, and it just sits on your tongue, and it just washes over, and it stays there. And so the complexity, the finish of a wine is really a mark of quality, because there are some wines that you want kind of to drink and it's out the door, but most wines you want to say, I still taste that. That's still providing me pleasure. And certainly this wine, I mean, there's a lot. I will admit, I'm actually pretty surprised, because I had this wine when it came in and I liked it, but I like it more now. And so I guess that's, it's in its evolution stage, and I really like where it's going. But finish is a mark of quality. When you find a wine that just lingers on the palate, yeah, revisit. That's a nice wine.
Yeah, Jack Altman had some nice comments that I'm going to let him make himself about this wine and food pairings.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I like the wine, but I found a lot of tart cherry in it. But I found it almost so much tannins that it was almost not quite bitter, but it was very acidic to me. But I made a baked brie with some smoked paprika, walnuts, and a balsamic cherry bite to go with it, and it was delicious. So, if you ate this with duck, or if you ate this with mushrooms, or if you ate this with like a smoked fish and cheese tart, it would be phenomenal. So, I'm always on my wine with food thing, which is a little nuts, but but I think it's a delicious wine with the right foods. As a drinking wine, I found it a little too acidic for me.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, and that's actually the French would probably say exactly. That's what we want.
Yeah.
Because it's really more of I would say it's more of an American thing, and I say American just because we are the largest wine consuming country in the world. So we do set a lot of trends, and we do account for a lot of consumption. But so many of the great wines of the old world really weren't meant to stand by themselves. And this is a really crude analogy, but it's like ketchup. Ketchup by itself is less appealing than ketchup with some French fries or a burger. What it does with the food is more than it has on its own. And this is, I would say as a wine, so the acidity is not so much a factor of tannin. Tannin is that mouth drying astringency that you find in coffee, chocolate, and bold wine. The tannin here, I would say is medium to medium plus. There are definitely more tannic wines. It definitely has structure, but where that has been, I guess, in some respects, deliberately encouraged, is so that this would stand up to a big steak, roast up, something that is going to have fat. And for fat, kind of the counterpoint to fat, well, it depends on the fat, but in most cases, for the rich fat, the counterpoint is tannin. So you'd want something with some dryness that, when paired with that fattiness, they almost cancel each other out. You don't notice the dryness of the wine, and you notice more of the flavor from the food. But no, food, particularly, like I said, particularly with old wine, old world wines from Spain, Italy, France, Portugal, Greece. They really evolved with food. They evolved at the dinner table. They evolved with food, and less so kind of on their own. But I think always, try a wine by itself. If it works, that's great. But see what it'll do with and sometimes the meals can be like really weird things. Like in our industry, oftentimes we will we'll grab, often ridiculously sought after bottles, and we'll try to pair it with fast food. It seems like a waste, but it's a fun challenge. Like what does a 94 Napa cab, what fast food burger goes best with a 94 Napa cab? It's a weird challenge, but you can find that there are food pairings you've never imagined, and you only recognize it when you experience it. So always, always see what wine will do. It usually has some food friends, whatever that wine is.
Well, and the Marples recommend lamb, so maybe you could go out and get a
Mm.
gyro sandwich and have it with this
Absolutely.
fabulous wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, like I said, Bordeaux is a gastronomic center for France. The food that's prepared in the region is legendary, and in the kind of the French tradition, and Julie Child would be perfectly proud. It's not low cal. It's not light on the fat or cholesterol. It's more of everything, and it's very hedonistic. So
Right
you're
on.
not gonna go dine in Bordeaux and lose weight, generally speaking.
Oh, well, that's just part of the deal, right?
It happens. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, we are bumping up on 6:00, so I want to respect your time. But if you want to unmute and say thank you to Steve, thank you again for a wonderful program. We really appreciate it.
Actually, I would like to ask, what would people like to do in future months? I would love some. I mean, I'm happy to do whatever.
Yeah. Is there a
And if
particular
anybody,
region or wine that people would like to learn more about? Yeah, feel free to unmute if you have some suggestions. Our July Wine Around the World session is actually, we're throwing you off and throwing off the pattern. It's July 21st, which is the third Thursday. We're kind of juggling some summer schedules. So make a note of that. Still at 5:00, but that third Thursday as opposed to the second Thursday. So, Jack.
Yeah, how about some American wines not from California or Washington or Oregon?
There's a challenge.
We could.
There's a challenge.
No,
And not from Kansas.
Or Missouri.
What about the Finger Lakes? What
Oh,
about
that'd be
the Finger
interesting.
Lakes in upstate New York?
Perfect.
I have some many years ago experience with that makes me very nervous, but I know things have changed in the wine industry.
The Finger Lakes, has actually benefited greatly. Cornell is actually an ag school technically, and so they have both a department of enology and they now actually have a working winery, and so the kind of the brain trust that exists at Cornell has really helped a lot of the wineries in the Finger Lakes, and similarly, kind of what we saw in California, where wineries, American producers started producing really great wine, and lo and behold, Italians and primarily the French followed behind, and that was the French aren't going to say, "Hey, you're doing it right," but that's what they were saying. And in the Finger Lakes, the same is true for German, Austrian. They do better with cool climate varietals, Cabernet Franc, some lighter reds, Riesling, dry Riesling, delicious Riesling. But the Finger Lakes, they're very, very deep, cold lakes, and so they do some nice wines, and so the Germans and the Austrians, which also have make wines in that style, they've been locating there, and so there's some really nice wines coming out of that region. So I'd love to do that. That would be, and they're a little bit lighter in body. Yeah. Great in the summertime. Yeah.
We could do a whole series on university made wines. How's that?
Yeah, no, it's kind of sad. So speaking of universities, UC Davis is one of actually one of the best places on the planet for knowledge, for the study of grapes and winemaking, and they've actually started a massive program to put their they have several vineyards that hold kind of historic important cuttings, and they are now having to put that under it basically in a glass room because of pest and disease. So there's some universities are going to keep us drinking good wine, that's for sure. So Yeah. Support your local wine academic.
Yeah. John, did you have a comment?
Yes, in The Economist, I read that Britain is becoming a wine growing region because of climate change.
Mm.
Do you have any
Yeah.
comment?
Oh yeah, no. So Great Britain has produced wine for a decent amount of time, just not good wine. And but I would say probably 5 years ago, I had a bottle of bubbles from about an hour outside of London. And honestly, it drank like a bottle. It drank like champagne.
Huh.
And climate change has definitely, it's. I mean, I'm happy to see the English are producing some great wine. The sad thing is, people are buying up the English countryside and basically kicking out the locals to plant grapes. But no, England has. I mean, kind of the magic is, in the region of Champagne, aside from its climate, its secret sauce is really a deep, very thick layer of chalk. It was basically at the bottom of an ancient ocean. Well, that layer of chalk goes under the English Channel and it pops up as the cliffs of Dover. So England actually has the same secret sauce up until the last 10 years or so. They just didn't have the climate. But no, it's absolutely English bubble. There's still, I mean, Champagne doesn't do a lot of still wine, and England is not really excelling in still wine. It's still sparkling, which is the climate is not so warm that they can do great still wine as of yet, but their sparkling wine is outstanding. It's I guess a payoff of climate change.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks to Steve and thanks to Nancy for being my Ed McMahon sidekick tonight. And we will see you all back here on July 21st. So again, we'll send you an email reminder, but do note that change. But thanks a bunch. And thanks again, Steve. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Most appreciated.
Bye-bye.